Polynesia is an island world founded by nomads who were carried by wind and wave. Their ancient past is revealed by the shifting sands and by traditions that still survive today. This is a tiki. The Polynesians revere them to this day because they hold the spirits of their ancestors. The early voyagers carried tikis with them to sea for protection and for guidance in their new homes. The very first place those ancient nomads discovered was truly a blessing: the rich and fertile islands of Fiji. From these stepping stones, a new culture was born, creating a way of life that spread across the entire Pacific.
Nomads of the Wind is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. And by Canon, providing the power of imaging to express your visions at home and work. And by Ford, we drew on our global resources, tapped into advanced thinking from around the world, brought innovation and quality home, and built a totally new car. It's called Ford Contour, a world car for the 21st century.
The Polynesian Triangle is like an ancient spearhead thrust across the great Pacific Ocean. Long ago, a voyaging people made this their home. The story of the Polynesians is an epic natural history, man and nature each shaping the destiny of the other. At dawn, on the island of Raiatea, in the heart of Polynesia, a young man follows the path of his ancestors towards the summit of their sacred mountain, Timahani. On the ridgetop are 5-petaled flowers. It is said that the petals represent the fingers of a princess who was forbidden to marry her lover. It is for this treasured bloom that once in his life, every male on the island must make this pilgrimage, a gift for his loved one and a link with the past. For all Polynesians, the sunrise points to the future, the sunset to their origins. The sacred island of Raiatea is a legendary landmark in the story of Polynesia. When a Polynesian dies, his spirit returns here. But on Raiatea, tradition tells of a more ancient land, far to the west, beyond the setting sun, the island home of their ancestors. The islands of Polynesia are cast across the Pacific like a galaxy of stars. At the very center of this vast island world lies Tahiti and the sacred island of Raiatea. But the story of Polynesia begins about 2,000 miles to the west on the lush islands of Fiji. It is here in the Western Pacific that we discover the roots of Polynesia's human and natural history, which have spread across the entire ocean. The great Polynesian explorers who sailed into the vast Pacific first set foot on Fiji's islands. From here, they set out to discover and settle a vast island world. The first Polynesians came from Southeast Asia at least 3,000 years ago. Polynesia's natural world can be traced to the same ancestral homeland. Much of Polynesia's flora and fauna evolved from castaways, carried here by wind and wave. Seeds, eggs, and even animals themselves were carried here by storms millions of years ago. These plants and animals started new communities which evolved in isolation, sometimes even creating new species in the process. The yellow-breasted musk parrot is found only in Fiji, on the island of Viti Levu. But there are more than 300 islands in Fiji, and many have spectacular birds of their own. Collared lories, members of the parrot family, are found throughout Fiji. Their local name kula means both red and riches, two things which were closely associated in Fiji's past. The kula's brilliant red feathers were once as valuable as gold. This feather money was used as currency in the trade between islands. One of the kula's favorite feeding spots is the Endrala tree, which has a red treasure of its own, flowers packed with pollen and nectar. The kula's tongue, which works like a paintbrush, enables it to glean these riches with great expertise. When the flock finds a tree in bloom, they work quickly, like bandits, leaving very little of the tree's riches behind. The ancestors of many of Fiji's creatures, such as insects and birds, came to Polynesia on the wind. In fact, the only mammals native to Fiji are bats. These are flying foxes, among the largest bats in the world. They are fruit eaters, and to some, a bat filled with sweet pulp was a delicacy. Bats rarely fly great distances over water, but storms have carried 6 species to Fiji. There are no natural colonies on the islands farther east. Beyond Fiji, the expanse of open ocean is too great. With few mammals to hunt, ground-living birds and their eggs became popular sources of food for the early Polynesians. Megapodes use their big feet to scratch out pits for incubating their eggs. After people arrived, these birds were nearly exterminated. There is only one species left in Polynesia. The native birds were replaced by a newcomer to the forest. The red jungle fowl is the most widely domesticated bird on Earth. The first Polynesians carried these chickens with them as they set out across the sea. In time, they were successfully transported to almost every island in the Pacific. Generation after generation raised chickens for food until they became as much a part of island life as the coconut. When they first arrived, Fiji was blanketed by forests, but Polynesians were farmers. Using fire, they began to clear space for their crops and settlements. Of all their crops, none was put to more uses than the coconut. It provided food and drink, as well as materials for making rope, houses, bowls, and sandals. Their staple diet was yams, a plant they brought from Southeast Asia. This was an important food because it could be stored for months. Pieces of the tuber were respectfully buried in mounds of soil, which the owner would spit on as a gesture of good luck. Then he'd mark the site with coral sand. Yams were so important that the Fijian calendar revolved around the yam season. The kava, a pepper plant also introduced from Asia, does not have any nutritional value, but it does have enormous cultural value in Fijian society. It's the roots that are treasured, and these have become a kind of currency recognized throughout these islands. Visitors would bring a bundle of kava roots to present to their hosts. Pounded to a pulp, the roots are made into a drink, which was used mainly on social occasions to cement friendships or settle disputes. For 3,000 years, this tapping sound has been heard in Fijian villages and in many other islands in the Pacific. The hard work of making tapa cloth was traditionally the responsibility of skilled women. Tapa comes from the fibrous inner bark of the paper mulberry tree. The wet bark was beaten into thin layers, which were then combined to produce the fabric. It feels a little like felt when completed. It was used mainly for clothing and household decoration, but it was also employed as mosquito curtains to cover corpses or to screen the nuptial bed from the rest of the house. Stencils cut out of banana or palm leaves were used to decorate the fabric with rhythmic geometric designs. The vivid red dye was made from local clay, and black came from the soot of burned candle nuts. Today, Fijian bark cloth is still renowned for its bold designs and remains its most traditional product. Here on the islands of Fiji, we find the origins of an artistic heritage that in time was carried across the entire Pacific. Fiji's largest island has several substantial rivers. For the hill people, they serve as highways from the mountains to the sea. From the stems of giant bamboo trees, families constructed rafts called bili-bili for voyaging downstream to trade their crops with other clans living on the coast. Fiji was a successful stepping stone from which the first Polynesians set out to explore the vast island world that lay to the east. They would eventually settle on virtually every island in the mid-Pacific. The traditional lovo oven was used throughout Polynesia. It was an earth oven which used hot stones to cook food wrapped in leaves. It was usually reserved for feasts, like the one being prepared by these Fijian men. Women do the everyday cooking, but the men prepared the food for certain ceremonies, marriage, or the visit of a notable chief. Yams, taro, and bananas provide the bulk of the feast, but the main attraction receives special attention. Pigs were precious, a sign of wealth only to be eaten on the most special occasions. The first Polynesians made sure they had pigs on board when they set sail into the Pacific. They were an important part of life, but they were seldom part of the daily diet. A stuffing of hot stones was used to cook the meat from the inside, while the lovo took care of the rest. Like all Pacific Islanders, the people of Fiji depended on root crops for their main diet. Yam, taro, and arrowroot were vital to island life. Taro grows best if it's well watered. Recent evidence suggests that the Polynesians used highly engineered gardens to provide sufficient irrigation. Taro is particularly rich in fluoride, which accounts for the tough, white teeth typical of most Polynesian people. The Polynesians not only brought a variety of foods to eat, they also brought the pots to cook them in. The skill of making and using earthenware was an ancient tradition brought to Fiji by the first Polynesians. Curiously, except for a few neighboring islands, this craft was never carried farther east. Pots were made from local clay. The Polynesians didn't have the potter's wheel, but with simple tools they achieved incredible symmetry. By using a large pebble to mold the inside and a wooden paddle for beating the outside, they were able to create the desired shape. The pots were then fired in an open hearth. The entire process has remained unchanged for 3,000 years. It is actually pottery which has helped provide important clues to Polynesia's ancient past. For a long time, researchers have been trying to answer the question, where did the Polynesians come from? The pottery helped them solve the puzzle. Ancient Polynesian pottery is very distinctive because of its elaborate decorations, including intricate geometric designs and images of animals or people. The first pottery was discovered at a place west of Fiji called Lapita, the name now given to the culture which gave rise to the Polynesians. As they settled island after island, the early Polynesians left behind a trail of pottery. Researchers used this trail, along with common languages, to trace their ancestry all the way back to Southeast Asia. But how did the nomads get from Asia all the way to Polynesia? During the last ice age, sea levels were 300 feet lower than they are today. Islands just below the surface of the South China Sea were raised high above the ocean. People and wildlife in search of richer lands settled on the larger islands. But gradually, as the ice melted, the water level began to rise. Eventually, global temperatures increased, which led to the final melting of the great ice caps. Sea levels rose dramatically, causing extensive flooding. People chose either to move inland or to take to their boats again, launching a new wave of migration. Powered by the wind, the ancestors of the Polynesians ventured into an ocean so vast that it covers 1/3 of the earth. In time, they reached the shores of Fiji, a pristine group of islands with great natural wealth. Here they found fertile soil for their crops and plenty of wood for their homes and boats. The bold designs of the early Polynesians still gaze down from Fiji's ancient cliffs. The mountainous sand dunes of Singatoka on Fiji's largest island mark the site of one of the first settlements. The constant pounding of the Pacific reshapes the dunes, uncovering chapters of Fiji's past. As the wind shifts the sands, fragments of pottery emerge, remnants of the ancient Lapita culture. Here the sands reveal not just the pottery, but the potters themselves. This young woman was of tall Polynesian build and had perfect teeth. For the last 2,000 years, she has remained covered by the dunes, facing her ancient homeland to the west. This burial site is one of the most important archaeological finds in the Pacific. In Fiji, fire was the symbol of life. Learning to make a fire was part of becoming a man. A dry piece of hardwood was rubbed with a soft plow. Friction creates heat, and with patience, it ignites the fine shavings. This technique is called nita. With fire, they fashion the landscape to cultivate their crops. Fire helped to hollow out the hearts of great trees to create canoes. With the same flames, they fired their pottery and cooked their food. In a world in which metal was unknown and tools were made of stone, fire was a powerful ally. Compared to many islands in Polynesia, Fiji has a dazzling array of creatures. It's home to about 20 different species of giant millipedes. Some are a foot long and an inch thick, among the largest in the world. One of Fiji's most unexpected residents is the tree frog. No amphibians are found farther east in the Pacific. The secret of these tiny frogs is their unusual eggs. Instead of hatching into tadpoles which need fresh water to mature, these frogs have no tadpole stage. These self-contained eggs were able to survive the long ocean voyage to Fiji. The young emerge as fully formed froglets. The ceremonial drinking of yangana, made from the kava plant, was an ancient ritual that spread throughout Polynesia. It was performed during village meetings, which were held to discuss community matters or to welcome guests. The ceremony could last for hours. Each step was carried out with great attention to every detail. The number of claps used, the position of the bowls, the words chanted at each stage.
One dollar in a cotumuna leoni vanua. But the terevanga vi bakalunga taganikalo. We want to know Pinakana leoni vanua in a civicoso. One dollar in a lemloloma, mana.
Wrapped in leaves or bark, the crushed roots of the kava plant were mixed with water to release its narcotic power. The end product? A muddy-colored liquid which induces mild euphoria and a sense of well-being. A cowrie shell was placed on the floor, pointing to the guest of honor, which was often the chief of the village. He dressed in white tapa cloth. Before the men shared the bowl, the yangana was presented to the chief in proper fashion, with the drink held high so that all might see it. For centuries, the presentation of the sacred yangana drink has been performed in every Fijian village. Its origins are lost in time, but the spiritual power that surrounds this ritual is very real. The ancient hills of Fiji have been covered by forests for at least 30 million years. Fiji's original wildlife castaways found a bountiful land. Isolated and faced with little competition, species evolved in their own distinctive ways. More than 20 species of birds are found nowhere else, like this elegant bird of prey, the Fijian goshawk. Although small, it is a bold hunter and the main predator of these lowland forests. The musk parrots of Fiji are some of the most beautiful parrots in the world. Bright reds and blues light up the treetops as they gather to devour fruits, seeds, and berries. Fiji provides them with a tropical fruit feast. Like many parrots, they use their feet to hold the food up to their mouths, while their powerful beaks rip open even the toughest skins. Fiji is also famous for its fruit doves. The flame dove appears like a flicker of fire in the treetops. But the richness and diversity of Fiji's fauna is not confined to its bird life. More than 3,500 species of insects live in Fiji, like these brilliant shield bugs and this bizarre, monster-sized stick insect. Its appearance may be odd, but it's great camouflage. Of all Fiji's forest treasures, the silk-tail is the most elusive. Usually it is hidden by the darkness of the forest, but sometimes its iridescent feathers can be glimpsed in a pool of light. It is found only on one island in Fiji and nowhere else. Today, the challenge of seeing this beautiful bird in the wild attracts birdwatchers from all over the world. When the Polynesians discovered new islands, they first settled on the coast, but eventually people moved inland to the forested hillsides. The interiors of Fiji's large islands are extremely rugged and difficult to traverse. Here, rivers provide vital links between villages. Sea canoes were replaced by rafts, and the land became the focus of life, not the sea. The people of the highlands made their way down to the coast to trade with fishermen. Even though they lived far from the sea, they still maintained their ancient ties to the Great Pacific. As forest gives way to sea, Fiji reveals its other treasures. As James Michener wrote, the world contains patterns of beauty that impress the mind forever. The list need not be long, but to be inclusive, it must contain a coral atoll with its placid lagoon. Lagoons are safety zones. Outside lies open ocean. Inside, calm waters and sheltered hideaways. Nesting seabirds find sanctuary here. Despite crowded conditions in this busy crested tern colony, the chicks are left to wander freely. The terns may have found refuge from the open sea, but they still face the familiar pressures of parenthood, a constant struggle to meet the needs of fast-growing offspring. A tiny chick demands several meals a day. There is intense competition for food between terns in the colony, as well as birds from neighboring colonies who share the resources of the reef. Red-footed boobies prefer to nest at the edge of the sea, where it's easier to take off and land in the constant ocean breeze. Balanced in its precarious nest, the booby chick faces a long wait between meals while its parents feed beyond the reef, far out to sea. When the adult eventually returns, vigorous pecking stimulates it to regurgitate a partially digested fish. The chicks share in the bounty of the sea. Beneath the wind and the waves, millions of tiny creatures have joined together to form a spectacular community. Coral reefs are the largest living structures on Earth. Rich ocean currents make Fiji's reefs among the most colorful and productive in the world. These undersea worlds were home to the first castaways on Fiji. Marine organisms were the first true settlers in Polynesia. One of the most bizarre is this poisonous zebrafish. The ribbon eel scents for its prey. It can hunt from home, a crevice in the coral which it's reluctant to leave. This wriggling swarm of sea worms is an annual sexual event controlled by the moon and the tides. The adult worms anchored on the coral reef below shed sections of their tails which float to the surface. These sections, filled with eggs or sperm, were prized as a delicacy. The Fijian name for the worms is balolo. Their annual spawning was so predictable and so important to villages that it was part of the local calendar. In the Lau Islands of eastern Fiji, November was called the Moon of Many Balolo. This is the Fijian equivalent of caviar. Scooped from the sea by the basketful, the worm segments were often served at village feasts, baked, boiled, or raw. When Polynesians voyaged east to Tahiti, they took with them memories of this annual feast. There are no balolo worms so far out in the Pacific, but Tahitians still call this time of the year the balolo season. The balolo harvest was just one manifestation of the richness of Fiji's reefs, but the source of that wealth does not originate in Fiji. East of Fiji lies the island groups of Tonga and Samoa. These are volcanic islands which have erupted on each side of a yawning underwater chasm called the Tongan Trench. This vast canyon is 6 miles deep, large enough to contain Mount Everest. Nutrients that well up from the ocean depths nourish life that clings to the canyon walls. Soft corals filter plankton from the currents. Sea fans thrive in these colorful communities. But this is an unstable world, frequently shaken by earthquakes, landslides, and coral rocks tumbling into the abyss. Far below the coral gardens, the bedrock of the ocean is in turmoil. The floor of the Pacific is made of plates which are forced into motion by the Earth's core. Where they collide, the bowels of the Earth burst into the sea. It was from such violent beginnings that the islands of Polynesia were born. Here on the fiery edge of the Pacific was a voyaging culture that knew no bounds. Shortly after the first Polynesians discovered Fiji, they settled its neighboring islands as well. These are Samoans. On the islands of Samoa, nature has not been quite so generous. Less than 1 million years old, the island of Savaii rose from the fiery crucible of the earth. As soon as the lava cooled, life came from the sea. Blennies are fish, but they can survive in the surf, where they scrape algae from the rocks. The island of Savaii is still being created. In many places, the soil is still warm beneath the surface. Beyond the shore, a lava plain stretches to the far horizon. In this harsh landscape, few living creatures can find a home. Yet in the shelter of folds which were created when the lava cooled, soil has formed and plants have taken root. From humble beginnings, life grew on Savaii. The people here have faced a life of hardship in a land where two of the main features are cyclones and rocks. Fortunately, the soil, though thin and stony, is rich in minerals. If there is water beneath the surface, farmers can grow taro and other crops. It takes years of toil and dedication to create a garden from a wilderness of lava rocks. Faced with challenges on land, the Samoans were dependent on their boats to help them trade for supplies with neighboring islands. As in all of Polynesia, canoes were the main form of transport. By adding a sail, the nomads were able to harness the power of the wind. In the waters near Samoa, they practiced new sailing skills. Ocean voyages required the ability to sail against the wind. To accomplish this, the Polynesians devised a technique of tacking. The entire mast and sail were moved to the other end of the craft, together with the steering oar. Called shunting, this seemingly clumsy method worked well, but it was essentially a job for two. Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, and the nearby Lau Islands developed a trading triangle linked by the crossways of the sea. The Lau Islands became famous for the quality and beauty of their tapa cloth and for the finely worked artifacts crafted from shells of the hawksbill turtle. These handmade goods were in demand in distant Samoa, which had become well known for its own high-quality merchandise. finely woven mats used in the home and for ceremonial wear. Braided from narrow strips of pandanus leaves, each mat might take a month or more to make. Once complete, the mat was decorated using red feathers of Fiji's famous parrot, the kula bird. The Samoans traded for the feathers or for the birds themselves, which they kept in captivity. Everywhere in Polynesia, red became a sign of wealth, status, power, and beauty. In Fiji, tradition tells of an ancient land, a mythical and idyllic island where beautiful women lived and everything was red. The people who settled these islands all spoke the same languages and shared the same ancestors, but each one developed traditions and skills of their own. Craftsmen on Tonga carved the ivory teeth of giant sperm whales. Using stone tools, they fashioned artifacts highly valued throughout all the islands of the Western Pacific. But it was the flowering of sailing technology that brought about the great era of Pacific voyaging. Among the sand dunes of Sigatoka lie reminders of Polynesia's most distant past. Here in Fiji, a nomadic, voyaging people found a new home. From this cradle of Polynesia, their descendants voyaged across the ocean, carrying traditions from the world they left behind. On Raiatea, the most sacred of all the islands, the tiare flower remains to this day a symbol from the Polynesian past. A gift from one generation to another.
Nomads of the Wind is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. And by Canon, providing the power of imaging to express your visions at home and work. And by Ford, maker of the new Ford Contour, a world car for the 21st century.